And I'm hoping that one of you might prove it by the end of the semester.
What is an advanced Fourier system? That's not a thing. Also, one of you might prove it. You don't prove a system, you prove a theorem. All right, I'm already mad. We've only watched this for like 3 seconds. I'm Jordan Ellenberg. I'm a mathematician and a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the author of the new book, Shape. And I am here to break down some math scenes in film and TV. Okay, so we just saw on the blackboard, if you want to know where the math joke is there, a purported claim that one number to the 12th power is another number to the 12th power plus a third number to the 12th power, which would be a counterexample to Fermat's last theorem, one of the most famous conjectures in all of number theory. So the joke is that Homer has inadvertently disproved one of the most famous questions of number theory. I would say the blackboard writing was pretty good, and actually there are tons of former mathematicians on The Simpsons writing staff. J. Stewart Burns, who graded my algebra homework in my first year of college, later became a Simpsons writer and then the head writer on Futurama. And I actually think the moment at which he erases a less than sign and replaces it with a greater than sign, messing up inequalities is a super common minor mistake with big consequences that mathematicians make all the time. So I'm actually going to give that one like a 9 out of 10 for realism and explosions and generally being funny.
Thank you, Stephen. I also put an advanced Fourier system on the main hallway chalkboard. And I'm hoping that one of you might prove it by the end of the semester.
What is an advanced Fourier system? That's not a thing. Also, one of you might prove it. You don't prove a system, you prove a theorem. All right, I'm already mad. We've only watched this for like 3 seconds.
The person to do so will not only be in my good graces, but also go on to fame and fortune by having their accomplishment recorded and their name printed.
I'm just stopping it so I can look at the blackboard, and the blackboard actually looks pretty good. I see the abbreviation IFF, which is very realistic. It means if and only if, something we say a lot in math, but it takes a long time to write out in chalk. So we write IFF, and I see that there. I don't really get why there would be a blackboard in the hall and everybody just like walks up to it at the same time. Somehow he was talking about Fourier analysis in his class on the blackboard, and then now there's a problem that seems to be about graph theory, which is a completely different branch of mathematics. So this is a very famous scene, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this is the first time I've ever seen it, because from the way it was described, I knew I would find it annoying, and you know what? It is annoying. I was right. You did this to me. It made me watch this after my whole life of never having seen it. I don't know, there's like no attempt to make the math realistic. There's this kind of absurd idea of what it means to prove a big theorem. He's excited that they're gonna be published in the MIT Tech, like the student newspaper. Like that's what's exciting about proving a big theorem. Nothing about this was good. 3 out of 10. That's my rating.
$4.42.
I just want to speak to the soundtrack, by the way. This kind of music is surprisingly good for sort of creating like a mathematical frame of mind, and I do sometimes listen to music like this in order to kind of achieve math brain.
Major contribution. The golden ratio.
Okay, that was like a sort of funny mess up. He wrote A is to B as A is to A plus B. He means as A plus B is to A, because if A is to B as A is to A plus B, that would mean that B and A plus B were the same, which would mean that A was 0, which is, I think, not what he means to say.
With the same unique ratio. The squaring can continue.
I'm gonna tell you a funny story, which is that I had a friend in college who got into the film industry after he graduated. At one point, she said, I want you to have lunch with a friend of mine because he wants to make a movie about math. We sat there for a long time just talking about the mathematical life. Anyway, that guy was Darren Aronofsky. He, at the time, was a sort of like trying to launch his career as a filmmaker. And what we're watching here is his first movie. And I do not remember what I told him about what the mathematical life was like. I don't think it was that much like this.
Remember Da Vinci. Artist, inventor, sculptor, naturalist. Rediscovered the balanced perfection of the golden rectangle and penciled it.
Also no longer believed that Da Vinci was interested in the golden ratio or used it as a model for his art, by the way.
Pythagoras loved this shape, for he found it everywhere in nature. the nautilus shell, ram's horns, whirlpools, tornadoes, our fingerprints, our DNA, and even our Milky Way.
There's no way Pythagoras knew the shape of the Milky Way, though, by the way, just so you know. I think those equations at the end were completely random and had nothing to do with what he was talking about. I think the last one might have been Q expansions of modular forms, went by pretty fast. This movie, as a depiction of math, I would actually give a 7 out of 10. There's a lot I like about it. This particular scene, I think, focuses on the parts of it where it misses the mark a bit, so I'll give the scene a 4 out of 10.
The Tyrannosaur doesn't obey any set patterns or park schedules. It's the essence of chaos.
I'm still not clear on chaos.
This is, of course, every mathematician's dream, that like the movie star in the front seat actually asks you to explain your research instead of you just deciding to do it.
The orientation of the hairs on your hands.
Hey, Alan, look at this.
The amount of blood distending.
First of all, I'll just say that I mean, this is a great acting moment from Jeff Goldblum. I feel like he exactly captures like a certain uncomfortable way that some people like to explain things. Uncomfortably real, uncomfortably real. The math itself is not bad. I mean, chaos technically is not exactly the same thing as unpredictability, but it is actually central to the idea of chaotic dynamics. So if you had to do it in this much time, that's about as well as you can do. So one interesting thing about this is the US military got really, really into chaos theory. Primarily the interest, a lot of it was driven by the popularity of this movie and the idea, oh, a butterfly flaps its wings in one way instead of another, and then there's a tsunami like across the globe. And the way you're supposed to think of this mathematically is like, wow, long-range predictions are really hard, and there might actually be mathematical reasons they're impossible beyond a certain time horizon. I think when the military heard, oh, if a butterfly flaps its wings in a certain way, there could be a tsunami around the globe, their reaction was, get me that butterfly. Exactly, which is really the wrong way to think about it mathematically. I would give this an 8 out of 10. I feel like they didn't try to do too much. They didn't like flash equations on the screen that had nothing to do with the subject. They just kind of stuck to having a sort of basic, quick layperson's explanation. Extra credit for Goldblum, I think, doing a very good job of conveying a certain type of mathematician. Like, I would believe that he talked to a bunch of mathematicians while figuring out how to act this role.
So using this equation on the upper left right here.
So I'm just gonna stop right here because that is the Pythagorean equation of baseball. I love it. I haven't seen this movie, so I love that that's in there. I was like obsessed when I learned about this when I was like 13 or 14. The fundamental idea that if you know how many runs a team scored and how many runs they allowed, just from that information you could predict pretty accurately how many games they would win and how many games you would lose is somehow at the absolute heart of the discipline of sabermetrics, which is the study of baseball statistics, so popular in the United States that it has its own name. That is indeed exactly the kind of thing that in the early history of statistical analysis of baseball, somebody would have been explaining on a whiteboard to be like, no, you actually need to pay attention to this.
People are overlooked for a variety of biased reasons and perceived flaws. Bill James and mathematics cut straight through that.
Yeah, so the name check is right. There used to be Bill James's run created formula. He might have mentioned John Thorne too and Pete Palmer. I think those three people would have been the people who were out in the wilderness saying baseball teams actually ought to be thinking about these numbers.
Of the 20,000 notable players for us to consider, I believe that there is a championship team of 25 people that we could afford.
Yeah, I mean, I love this because this is like literally me during the baseball season, like following my team and looking at sheets that look just like this. This is not higher math, right? In some sense, the whole message of this movie, you don't have to develop like ultra new, high test, impossibly difficult math in order to do better than anybody else. It was actually pretty basic. Just like sort of making some spreadsheets and counting the right things instead of the wrong things. I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10. It doesn't set out to do too much, but what it does perfectly accurately. I'll just comment that you see like one of the best functions, the Riemann zeta function written on the glass in this scene, the sum of you can't see it on the clip, but I can tell you what's below the sigma. It's the sum from I equals 1 and then above it to infinity, which is absolutely central to number theory, physics, like all kinds of things. So it's certainly something that Nash might have been thinking about. This is a bit weird because it looks like, again, I'm reading backwards, but the top line looks sort of like something in ring theory or algebra. He has some kind of a ring modulo an ideal, and then below it he has something that looks a little bit more like something from physics. So I would be curious to know like who wrote, you know, when math movies are made, they will have a mathematician prepare stuff to be on the board or even on set to like sort of oversee what's on the blackboards to make sure that it's correct.
I believe I can prove that Galois extensions are covering spaces.
The Galois extensions for covering spaces was understood by Grothendieck in the 60s. So they are talking about real math, but it was not something an enterprising grad student figured out in the late 70s in Princeton. It was something that by that time would have been kind of well known to plenty of people in that building. The book, A Beautiful Mind, is fantastic, a wonderful book that really captures a lot about the sort of rich sociology of mathematics, and I think is a very sensitive treatment of somebody's struggle with mental illness. The movie is kind of a cartoon of all that. It's not a great movie, to be honest, either in its depiction of math or in its depiction of schizophrenia. I am gonna give this scene, I would say, a 5 out of 10, because I think they did make some effort at the math words being realistic, but I don't think they really made any attempts to have any math take place, and they could have done more to make it more realistic.
I see you're looking at a little problem.
Little? It's big.
So what's happening here, let me give a little background, is that the professor, in an attempt to show up this child prodigy, has intentionally given her a problem with a sign error in it. Okay, so one thing that might not be obvious about this shot you're looking at right now is that I'm in it, but I'm off screen. You can't see me. I was on this set while this scene was being shot. I'll also say, in terms of writing on the board, that this young actor, McKenna Grace, she memorized all the stuff that needed to go on the board and she wrote it. So you can imagine that with all the cuts, they could have had somebody else write it and just had a few close-up shots of her chalk on the board. But in fact, like the sort of whole stuff that's on the board, she memorized it all. For n congruent to 4 mod 5, the answer is a multiple of 5. Okay, so now you're seeing an incredibly realistic depiction of a professor giving a number theory lecture, because of course it's me while I was on set. Here, I say something wrong. I say something about something being something modulo 5. That means you divide by 5. And then I go on to say that that means it's divisible by 7. And what I realized is that I think to make it all fit into the scene and have the cut be in the right place, I think they cut 2 different pieces of audio together. Apparently nobody has noticed this. So honestly, I think this mistake is like not too bad. It pretty much went under the radar for the world. So a Penguin UK exclusive revealed here for the first time. I will say, here's the thing. This movie is mostly not about math. And in the moment where there was one line of dialogue where the sign and the equation on the blackboard was referred to incorrectly, and I brought this up with the director, and sort of to my surprise, they stopped everything. They asked me, what should the line say? And then McKenna Grace learned a new line, and they just like redid it. So again, everybody, you know, dozens of people, like everybody stops. They're like, we're not gonna have it come out with this line wrong. So I was pretty impressed by their commitment to accuracy. So I'm gonna give this one a 9 out of 10. You know, one does not usually watch 10 math movies in a row, so it's interesting to sort of compare and contrast and see the way they play off each other. I think for best actorly portrayal of somebody doing math, I think I'm gonna give it to Jeff Goldblum. I think he was the one who I most felt might have sort of spent a long time studying mathematicians and truly trying to give off a mathematician vibe. I think in general, people don't even know that a mathematician is a thing that in 2021 you can be. I think for a lot of people, and partly because for reasons of necessity, the math that we teach in school is math that's pretty old. A lot of people think the mathematicians all are long dead people who wore robes. That's the thing that people need to know. So if not every equation on the blackboard is right, or not every word is said exactly the way I would say it, I think it's like a much bigger inaccuracy to believe that math is finished and something that happened a long time ago. And I think every movie about a living, working, contemporary mathematician does a lot of work to correct that inaccuracy. Thanks for watching. My new book, Shape, is available in hardback, ebook, and audio at the link in the description. And don't forget to click here to subscribe to Penguin UK for more videos like this.